Today I want to talk to you about the importance of ethics in the speaking situation. First, what is ethics? Ethics is the branch of philosophy that explores what is right and what is wrong in human activity. But ethics applies to every aspect of our lives. And so there are some ethical issues that we need to address when we talk about speech. First, we have to be sure that the purpose of our speaking is ethical. Are we saying things that are of value, and will they work for the good of all, for the good of society? Now, there are plenty of examples in history of speakers who were very dynamic personalities on stage and in the performance situation who were not ethical. Obviously, the biggest one that comes to mind is Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a powerfully dynamic speaker for his day, but his goals, his purpose for his speech was very unethical because he was leading an entire nation down the path of genocide and hate. That's an unethical purpose. Now, in our classroom situation, you're not going to be dealing with anything as monumental as speaking to a national audience. But even then, you need to make sure that your purpose is ethical. One of the assignments you'll have in the class towards the second half of the semester is a persuasive speech. And I'm going to encourage you to speak on a subject that is controversial, a subject that is something of significance, something that you're passionate about. And you need to make sure that your goals are ethical in what you do. Is what you're trying to persuade us to do something that is for our benefit, something that will benefit society? I think it would be very ethical to talk about the use of marijuana as a medicine, a treatment for glaucoma, for cancer, for other diseases. I question the ethicality of talking about legalizing marijuana just because, hey, it's a fun recreational drug. One is for the common good. The other is for your own personal gratification. So make sure that your purpose is ethical. Make sure that your purpose is of value. Secondly, you need to make sure that you are prepared to do your best. As a Christian, I believe that one of the chief definitions of the phrase taking the Lord's name in vain is not using it as in swearing, in profanity, but taking the name of Christ and then proceeding to not do my very best. It is ethically my responsibility to always do the very best that I can so that I can bring glory to God. And I think that goes for my students as well. You have a responsibility as an individual, as hopefully a Christian, to do your best to bring glory to God and to bring credit to yourself. There's an example given in the textbook about a student who was speaking on suicide prevention as one of their informative speeches. And because of the preparation and the quality of the speech that she gave, a student in the class recognized some of the symptoms she warned to be on the lookout for and was able to intervene in the life of a friend who was contemplating suicide. But the point is, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your Maker, you owe it to your parents, to your children, to your family, to always be the best that you can be. And to do anything less is to some degree unethical. You are not being all that you can be. An important consideration when we talk about ethics in the speaker's world is also the need to be honest in what you're saying. I talked a moment ago about Adolf Hitler, and Hitler would bend and twist the truth to his own purposes. And as speakers, we have the ethical challenge to make sure that we are speaking truth. That if we quote a source, we are doing our best to honestly communicate what that writer said. And so, as you look at material, as you research your speeches, work to create a sense of honesty and integrity. This requires a degree of personal integrity in the speaker, that they are going to strive at all times to be honest, to be factual, to be truthful. Another of the ethical challenges facing speakers today is the importance of decency, of civility in discourse. Avoid name calling, avoid hostility, avoid polarizing arguments and polarizing ideas. That doesn't mean that you have to avoid debate, but it means that debate must come with a degree of civility and kindness, generosity. Now, we're talking about speech in a classroom situation, and that creates another level of ethical behavior that we need to talk about as part of this lecture. First of all, what is plagiarism? Plagiarism is whenever you pass someone else's work off as your own. And on the occasions that you are quoting someone else, that you are sharing ideas or information that you brought from another source, you need to credit that source. To fail to do so is plagiarism. Now, when we get into our persuasive speeches, that becomes even more important, because the quality of your source will affect the way we view your message. Now, plagiarism comes in many shapes and sizes. And so I want to talk about some of the different types of plagiarism that you could encounter, and how to avoid doing that. Now, the first kind of plagiarism I want to talk about is global plagiarism. Global plagiarism means that you are passing off someone else's work as a whole as your own. In other words, you have turned in a paper that somebody else wrote entirely, or a speech that someone else wrote entirely, and you're saying it's your work. It's global because every bit of it has been stolen. I don't really see a lot of global plagiarism in teaching, unless it is in the area that someone has purchased a paper or purchased or gotten from online a complete paper. But that's rare. It's not as common, because I like to believe that in general students are trying to be honest. They're trying to be fair. And so generally you don't see somebody passing off an entire paper or an entire speech as their own when it's not. Then we have what the textbook refers to as patchwork plagiarism. This is much more common. This is when you have gone from 2 or 3 different sources and brought them together for your paper, and you haven't given credit for them. This happens a lot when people are cutting and pasting from the internet or from Wikipedia, which is not good. This is still plagiarism. And so a patchwork plagiarism is where we see lots of different things that have been brought together and put together to make the whole, but it is still plagiarized. Credit is not given. Now, finally, and the most common kind of plagiarism we run into is what the textbook refers to as incremental plagiarism. Little things that might not even be intentional, but without correction still serve as plagiarism. If you make a quote from someone, say you quote a poem or you quote a statistic, and you don't give the source, that's incremental plagiarism. If you paraphrase someone and don't give credit, it's still plagiarism. It might not be a direct quote, but it's somebody else's idea. And so you've got to make sure that you're giving credit in your speech to the person whose ideas you are quoting. And I think it's important to understand, it's not a bad thing to quote somebody else. That's a good thing. That represents research. But failing to give credit to the person from whom you have taken the quote is plagiarism. And you will be graded harshly on that if you're guilty of that over the course of the semester. Whether it's intentional plagiarism or accidental because you thought you had given credit or you meant to give credit, but you forgot to. You got to cover your bases on this. Finally, I want to take a second and speak to the idea of ethical listening. over the course of the semester, you're going to be listening to several speeches because you're going to have to critique a number of your colleagues in the class for each individual speech that we give. And so there are things that you need to do to be an ethical listener as well. First of all, don't prejudge the speaker. Give them a chance to present their ideas. Base your judgment upon them on whether they accomplish what they set out to accomplish, whether what they say is of value. You need to be a courteous and attentive audience. Now, again, this is a little different because we are watching video and not dealing with a live speaking situation. But in a live speaking situation, you can be very disruptive to the speaker if you are not a courteous listener. Over the last couple of years of teaching speech, there are things that I've noticed audiences are getting more and more used to doing, and I just think it's because we are not training students to be good audiences anymore. You can't get up in the middle of somebody's speech and go to the bathroom. If you did go to the bathroom in a break and you come back and they're speaking, you need to wait outside till they finish. You need to be courteous and not do anything that will interrupt. That includes staying off your cell phone, paying attention, watching, being attentive. Now, again, we will not deal with that in this class because you're going to be watching video that was recorded at another time. But remember, when you go to church, when you go to a traditional face-to-face class, you have the ethical responsibility to be a good listener. The third aspect of ethical listening is that we need to protect the open exchange of information. And we talked about civility in discourse. And I think this is another one of those areas where we seem to have lost our way in the current world. We don't seem to have a problem too often with belittling the speaker because we don't like the message, or being rude because of a political position. That will not be tolerated in this class, even in a video response. If you're watching a video and then you respond and critique that video, you must be civil. You must address your classmates in a courteous and civil manner that will preserve the open exchange of ideas. There is no crime in thinking, and so don't shut somebody down that's trying to express their honest opinion. All right, so we've talked about the ethics of speaking. We've talked about the ethics of the speaker and the importance of making sure that your purpose is ethical, that you are being honest, that you are... All right, so we talked today about the ethics of speaking. First of all, the ethics of the speaker, making sure that their goals are ethical, making sure that you are prepared to do your very best work, making sure that you are being honest in what you say and using your sources in an honest manner. We talked about the ethics of speaking as a student, the importance of being honest about where information comes from and giving credit to the proper source. And finally, we talked about the ethics of the listener, of being attentive and courteous, of not prejudging the speaker, and of preserving the civility that will allow us to openly exchange ideas. These are important principles, guys. They don't just apply to what we're doing in our classroom situation. They apply to how we live our lives. As social creatures, we've got to have this sense of ethical behavior if we're going to be able to trust our leaders, the people who speak to us on a daily basis. So, thanks. Looking forward to hearing your first speeches, and I will talk to you later.